chocolate bar if you want to take.
The Trader Joe's. That's great.
We're just eating the whole thing at once.
Going home?
You're expecting to see a lot of people out here tonight talking about this, or you think it's
I
gonna be?
don't think so. I was gonna read this today. Ended up sitting in the emergency room with my brother all day, so.
Oh no.
Yeah, he's all right. They just said, well, something go wrong last night, so we called this morning. I think they're gonna spring me in a half an hour. I show up. It was 9 o'clock. We got out at 3.
Oh jeez.
Nope, don't see him.
I don't know where everybody's located, if they're putting up things that we went over to sign. There's so many of them.
We went through all this stuff anyways.
Choices of where you sat today, so
Thank you.
sit wherever you want. If you feel a little crowded here, you can sit next to me.
Would have killed them to make this one
That's okay.
would have hurt if it was like 1 foot bigger this way. You know,
Yeah, it's a little bit close to the wall.
it's a little.
Always good to sit near the end in case you have to leave in a hurry. Shooting something, throwing bottles. What do you do?
I'm a forester by trade. Got a real estate.
Oh, good.
I started doing timberland forestry.
Oh, neat.
Timberland real estate, I should say.
So selling woodlots, buying woodlots, stuff like that.
Huge investment pieces.
Oh, I see.
I'm work with, I run Landvest, timberland marketing.
I gave you guys this sheet, it just has, if you need a proposed motion. So this here,
That's what this is? No.
that are excerpts from the comprehensive plan.
Okay.
It's just that,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe Cecilia knows.
and then on the second page,
Cecilia right here.
this was from the chapter on affordable housing, and these were the implementation dates.
Oh,
of
okay.
affordable housing. I just printed the page. Where that's from.
Helpful.
Yeah.
Oh, no, you're kidding. Oh, gosh.
So it's supposed to be, it's just, again, short enough so people find it.
I guess, people don't read us because of that. I get that. But, I think it's a public record. And it's,
Now I have to come now
page that starts with the word means.
That's from the comprehensive plan to, so it's the vision. It's basically
Oh,
this.
starting here.
Starting here, yeah. And then also this is the, for the
Exchange Street,
housing.
Crowley Street.
Pressure, folks, but we just kind of alleviated some tension, space tension.
Oh, okay, thank you.
So if you guys want to,
Who's congested, it looks like, bowling alley. People wanna go, it's really tight, yeah. They look busy, they don't wanna go. They drive around the block 4 times and go and get a parking spot in the old block.
Well, I think living on the other side of downtown, the only issue for me is just getting through downtown. So
It was.
keeping clear access,
Oh, yeah,
year round.
Missed a good one.
Other than that, I don't care.
Yeah.
I like busy, active.
It looks better. Looks better for businesses, but,
That's true.
Yeah, I did check with her.
reminder to the board members, turn your microphones on.
Didn't have one.
Skipping the information exchange tonight, Cecilia, is that the?
Yes, it's not part of the agenda.
All right, that was probably at least 30 seconds. It's my pleasure to call to order the Wednesday, December 13th meeting, 2023, this is, meeting of the Freeport Planning Board. We have several public hearings, technically, although really we're just talking about basically one big thing tonight and a couple of public hearings split up for technical reasons. We will dive right in to item number 1, which is a public hearing on proposed amendments to Chapter 21 of the Freeport Zoning Ordinance. We are discussing proposed amendments to said zoning ordinance related to municipal compliance to state laws, including LD 2003, which is called an act to implement the recommendations of the Commission to increase housing opportunities in Maine by studying zoning and land use restrictions. What is the acronym for that? The proposed amendments will potentially allow more housing in almost all zoning districts. We'll add a new section, Section 536, which will create an affordable housing density bonus. And we're also including amendments to lower barriers to the development of accessory dwelling units. And we're doing quite a bit of non-substantive text amendments while we're at it. So before we open the public hearing itself, in the technical sense of that, we are going to talk a little bit about how we got here tonight, where we are, what the process has been so far, what the process will be moving forward, just to make sure everybody's up to speed and everybody understands, you know, why we're talking about what we're talking about, and kind of what the next steps are as we go toward implementing all of these changes as close to January 1st as we can possibly implement them. I think it is fair to say. Cecilia, do you want to
Yeah, sure. Let me share some
dive right in?
slides here. Let me make sure we can see it. Ooh, sorry. Okay. So as Sam mentioned, LD 2003, which is now called Public Law 2021, Chapter 672, not to confuse us, is an act to implement the recommendations of the Commission to increase housing opportunities in Maine by studying zoning and land use restrictions. It's basically the state's response to the housing crisis. So there are a couple of new rules that municipalities, all of them, have to comply with. So January 1st is when we should be complying with this rule, or otherwise the state's rules will, supersede our rules. We have had several meetings on this with the planning board. And we also had a little workshop to inform the public. I'm going to repeat some things just for those of you who are at home on Zoom and perhaps this is new to you, or for those of you who are here today and this might also be new to them. So We sent approximately almost 4,000 letters to notify the public. We also sent out an email with the agenda, letting people know for those who subscribe to the planning department listserv. And the process moving forward is that if the planning board will make recommendations after tonight's public hearings to the town council, and the town council holds its own public process, and they must take action to approve the recommendations before any of these amendments become effective. So there will be one final step after tonight's meetings.
So there will be 2 council meetings, right? So if, assuming this board votes to recommend these changes, then the council will meet, discuss, if they need to discuss the proposed changes, then they will set a public hearing for their next, hopefully next meeting. Then there will be that public hearing, and then they can vote to adopt the changes. So we are, we're three counting this meeting, we're 3 meetings away from adoption, potentially.
And I just want to note, you will not receive a letter when the town council sets the meeting, so do pay attention to the town council agenda, because the planning board when we make zoning amendments, we notify folks, but when the town council has meetings afterwards, there's no notification process. All right, so a little brief overview of LD 2003. I'm sorry if you have already heard this a couple of times. So the main elements of LD 2003 is the municipal role in fair housing and statewide housing production. It clarifies that municipalities can regulate short-term rentals. It also has provisions for an affordable housing density bonus and an extra dwelling units allowance and accessory dwelling units allowance. Most of the changes on the amendments that you see before you, or on the zoning ordinance and the subdivision ordinance and the shoreline zoning ordinance, have to do with these 3 last provisions: the affordable housing density bonus, the extra dwelling units allowance, and the accessory dwelling units allowance. So I'll just briefly go over each one of them, very briefly, because I want to leave enough time for the public hearing and the public comments. So the affordable housing density bonus, it's a state rule that says that municipalities must give a bonus of 2.5 times the base density if somebody comes in and does an affordable housing development. So basically, if you were only allowed to build 1 house in a lot, now you'd be allowed to build 2.5. And of course, you would multiply and get a full number. It also says that we can't require more than 2 parking spots for every 3 units. More than half of the units need to be affordable, and they need to be affordable for at least 30 years. This bonus is not applicable everywhere to every zoning district. They are only applicable to zoning districts that already allow multifamily dwellings. And so it's 2 things. And they also not only must allow multifamily dwellings, but they also need to be either in a designated growth area or served by water and sewer. Here is a map of the multifamily districts, just so you get a visual idea of where these might be able to go. It mostly follows our designated growth areas, with a few exceptions. So we made a couple of amendments to comply with the affordable housing density bonus. So in section 104 of the zoning ordinance, we included a lot of amendments to the definition section. We added affordable housing development to all the zoning districts that allow multifamily zoning. And we amended section 514, which is our parking requirements on the zoning ordinance, to comply with the maximum of 2 for every 3 units. There's also a new section in the zoning ordinance, section 536, and that one is the affordable housing density bonus, new section, and that one will have the standards that they have to meet. In the subdivision ordinance, we didn't have to do much. but we did amend Article 3, which are the definitions so that they match the zoning ordinance, so that, you don't have to have different definitions in different documents. And we added some submission requirements. And then the shoreline zoning is just, making sure the definitions match. So that's a summary of those changes that we made for this particular element of LD 2003. So that new section on 536, the affordable housing development density bonus, it will clarify the location, that the eligibility is tied to location. It will state the affordability standards, mention that it has to be connected to water, wastewater, it has the parking, everything you need over there. So it's a new section on the zoning ordinance. Moving on to the, I'm sorry, before I proceed, does anyone have any questions on the planning board? Okay.
Not yet.
Okay. So the extra dwelling units allowance, that's the other big provision of LD 2003 that we need to make a lot of changes. This applies to all areas in town, and it basically says that you can have up to 4 dwelling units if in a lot, if the lot is in a designated growth area. Otherwise, there's a couple of, this is the most confusing part of LD 2003, I find, because the amount of dwellings you can put has to do with the place where the lot is and other factors. So for the extra dwelling units allowance, a lot that does not have a unit already on it can have up to 2 units if it's not within a designated growth area or served by water and sewer in a municipality without a comprehensive plan. We have a comprehensive plan, so we will go just by that growth area. So you can have 2 if you're not already if there's no house already in the lot, or if you just have a commercial property and no houses. A lot without a dwelling unit and that is in a growth area, then you can have up to 4. And then if you have a lot that already has an existing dwelling, you may have up to 2 additional dwellings, either 1 detached and 1 attached, or 1 of each. And this one then applies to any lot that already has a house. Of course, as I mentioned on the previous meetings, you have to meet your density requirements, water and sewer, shoreline zoning, subdivision, et cetera, et cetera. So here's a summary of the proposed amendments to incorporate that extra dwelling units allowance. We didn't have to do too much. There were some areas, throughout this planning process that the planning board has had some discretion in terms of what it could do that might go above and beyond the state requirements. So for fairness, the planning board decided that we should allow up to 3 dwelling units or 4 dwelling units if you're in a designated growth area, regardless of whether there's already a house there. I guess the idea behind that is it wouldn't be fair to allow some people, because at the time you come for the permit, that's when you would get that additional dwelling, and it wouldn't be fair for somebody who is like, I build one and then I'll build the other one a couple of years now, and now you can't do it because you didn't build all the 3 at once. So the planning board thought, for fairness, that that's how it would be. So the main amendments that we had to do with this, and it wasn't many changes that we had to do, was just to strike out section 201C that prohibited having more than 2 single-family houses in a lot. So now you will be able to have more than 2 or more houses, separated single-family houses in a lot. So that's a new change. And then there's a section 201L that talks about that dwelling unit allowances, and then we added to that sanitary and potable water standards. And to note, that actually applies to any new unit built in Freeport. We just noticed that our sanitary and potable water standards were not in a place that was very, it should have been in there regardless, and it should apply to any new house.
Isn't it important to mention before you go on that all other zoning standards remain in place?
Yes.
So setbacks, maximum density, you need to have a big lot to have the 4 dwelling units in every area of town.
Absolutely.
So it-
Yes. So, yeah, and thank you, Mitch. I think I'm like rushing through this because we talked about it so many times. But for those of you, who didn't watch the previous meetings, you still have to meet for the extra dwelling unit allowance. You're still subject to subdivision, shoreline zoning, wastewater. Any restrictive covenants still apply. So, it helps a little bit taking away some of that, red tape that comes when you're trying to build more, or just allowing you to put more houses in a lot, whereas before you would be forced to subdivide it or split it.
That's the core difference.
Yes, yeah. So here is a map of the designated growth areas. So all the areas that are colored, and they're mostly along Route 1, those are Freeport's current growth areas. The growth areas are defined and are pointed out in our comprehensive plan. So it's a good kind of segue to what we were talking about earlier today about the comprehensive plan. When we redo the comprehensive plan or update it, it's an opportunity to say, hey, I think it would make sense for this area to be a growth area versus this one, or I don't think this area should be a growth area. So it's an opportunity for the community to give feedback on that. Any questions on the extra dwelling units allowance? Okay. All right. And finally, there's accessory dwelling units allowance. The accessory dwelling unit allowance. So also from the state, it basically says that accessory dwelling units are allowed where housing is permitted, and the state only requires municipalities to allow one accessory dwelling unit in a lot that has a single-family house. So the state does not require the town to allow an ADU. ADU is what I call the accessory dwelling unit. It's the acronym for that. In a lot if there's already 2 houses or a duplex, but it's optional. Towns can allow that, and Freeport has chosen to do that. The state also says that we cannot require parking for accessory dwellings. So that's something that we also have to change. And the accessory dwelling unit can be within an existing single-family structure, attached or detached. So Freeport already allows accessory dwelling units. We have for many, many years now, almost maybe a decade. But we do only allow one, on a lot with one single-family unit. We do not allow them if there's 2 dwellings, and that is one change that you will see in the proposed amendments that the planning board thought we should allow them, even in cases where people already have 2 dwelling units or a duplex. The reasoning behind that is in order for you to have a duplex or 2 standalone single-family houses, is your lot already had to be bigger. So they didn't want to punish people for, having that. Accessory dwelling units are exempt from density requirements, so no matter how big or how small your land is or your lot is, you'd still be able to put one in according to the state. And also Freeport's ordinance does not have a density requirement for them too. So we already complied with that. And currently, the accessory dwelling units are not allowed in the shoreline zone in Freeport, unless it's connected to the public water and sewer. So that is also something that we are changing. So the planning board, actually, we started working on the accessory dwelling units before we got into the more meat and potatoes of the LD 2003, so all the other factors, because this was sort of like the low-hanging fruit, a little bit easier to understand. And in the process, we talked about, whether it would be appropriate to make it easier to build ADUs, because they're a form of helping to increase housing and helping people age in place. So the planning board, so we sort of revamped the whole section on ADUs to make them easier and remove some barriers. The planning board gave direction to allow ADUs, as I mentioned, on lots that already contain 2 dwellings, like a duplex or 2 single-family dwellings, to increase the maximum size to 75% of the existing single-family house, or up to 1,100 square feet, whichever is less. The current standard is 40% of the existing single-family house, which can make it very difficult if your house is already pretty small. The planning board also thought it would be appropriate to remove the owner occupancy restriction and the restriction that ADUs should have only 1 bedroom. And then the last big change to that section of the ADUs is to remove the requirement that says that the ADU must be in general harmony with the neighborhood and architectural style. However, if somebody is proposing an ADU and it is on a design district, they would still have to meet those design requirements. But it just didn't make sense to require that in other places where people are building homes and we don't require that for a single-family house. So for the ADUs, the major change that we made in terms of proposed ordinance amendments is Section 104 for definitions, the non-conformance section to just clarify that they are permitted even in non-conforming lots or uses. Also on Section 514 to strike out parking requirements or exempt them from parking requirements. That's our parking requirements section. And then we have that major amendments to Section 532, which is our accessory apartments section of the zoning ordinance. Has the standards for them.
Can I just clarify a couple of things about non-conformance, which, so I think, and this is super complicated, so I don't know if I need to frame it as a question, but I will say I'm never 100% sure about these guidelines, but is my understanding right that the non-conformance section, you could, if you live in a non-conforming structure, for example, if it's over the setback or something, but it's legally non-conforming, you could convert a part of that structure to an ADU, but any work that you do can't increase the non-conformance of the structure. So you couldn't, build, just because your house is legally non-conforming, doesn't mean you can go and build something else that is non-conforming somewhere else on the property. Or maybe another example would be if you are over the maximum lot coverage, and you wanted to build a detached ADU, you would not be allowed to do that because that would increase the nonconformity by covering more of the lot. Is that right?
I'm not sure about the lot coverage, but yes, so if you're on a property, as long as you don't make it more non-conforming, you would be able to build an ADU
Because
there.
density doesn't apply, but lot coverage is separate.
Is that in terms of impervious surface?
Yeah. That's what I'm always putting this in the context of my own property. So I have a very small lot and the house and
Would
the
you
driveway.
be, right, so then you'd be increasing the imperviousness.
If I paved over my backyard to make an ADU, I could conceivably go, even though I'm legally non-conforming now, I could conceivably, but I would not be allowed.
Worse.
Yeah, I would make it worse, and so I wouldn't be allowed to do that particular. I mean, there's other ways that I might be able to do it, but I couldn't. So I just want to say, just because the density doesn't apply, doesn't mean there are other standards that are also just waived in a situation like that. Does that make sense? I think that was it. Sorry.
Yeah,
We'll get to it again.
okay, we'll get to it again, okay. So,
Can you, if you have a specific question, can you make your way up to the podium and just identify yourself? I'm sorry, just because we have people watching on Zoom, I'm assuming, we actually don't know. I'm
yes, we
assuming
do
there's
have a couple of people on Zoom.
Yeah, and they need to be able to hear you as well.
Okay.
And you, I will just say I said this last meeting, the podium and the microphone are exactly where they need to be. So just for everybody's, it will pick you up perfectly just where it is, so you don't need to move it or alter it.
I'm Kara Wilson-Smith, and I just wanted to clarify the first line here. Allow ADUs in lots that already contain two dwellings, being that if there are two dwellings, we're now going to call one of them an ADU, or an
No.
additional ADU?
It's just that throughout Freeport, almost all zoning districts actually allow a duplex. So a duplex is when you have a structure that has two houses connected. And there are also a couple of lots in Freeport that actually has 2 single-family homes on it, on the same lot. So that's what it means, is that you could add an ADU to those lots that already have a duplex. Oh, sorry, I thought the microphone was working. All right, so did anyone not hear that?
Yeah, they didn't hear it back here.
Oh, okay. So in Freeport, throughout most of our zoning districts, we do allow duplexes or, houses that are attached. We used to call them 2-family houses. And we also have a couple of lots that have 2 separate homes in one lot. And it used to be that, and the state only requires municipalities to allow 1 ADU in a lot that has just 1 single-family house. It does not require the municipalities to allow an ADU if you already have 2 units in a lot. So we are going to allow them in lots that already have 2 units, because the lots that already have 2 units because they had enough space to have 2 units. They were bigger lots to begin with. So the planning board didn't think it would be fair to punish those people. And before we move away from this, also, we had to make so many different changes in our zoning ordinance, including, capitalize the S on single family throughout the whole entire document. And we sometimes miss a few things. So on section 532, I noticed that we accidentally crossed out the allow that should stay there. And
How did you notice that?
because I was reading.
I was going to raise that too.
Oh, Wayne, look at you.
And we also noticed that we needed to clarify section 532, 1, just to clarify this, allowing 1 ADU in lots that already allow duplexes, or lots that already have 2 houses in a lot. So these are just the little corrections that we need to make to that when you do a motion.
Okay. Somebody want to keep a running tally of those little corrections, or?
There was 2 corrections here or just 1?
2.
What was the second one I missed?
The other one is on section 532, 1.
532-1, okay, oh yeah, no
Yep.
more than 1 ADU, maybe.
Just adding that word either, and then adding, just trying to make it a little bit easier to
I got
read.
it.
Yeah. And, we did receive a public comment asking about, the shoreline zone. Unfortunately, if you are in the shoreline zone, you still, for putting an ADU, you still have to meet those space standards of that lot frontage. So we didn't go into much of the details of every single, of these 3 different big picture elements of the LD 2003, but shoreline zone still is still valid, so.
But you can do it in,
Yes, you can.
can do it.
Yes.
If you can meet the space
If you
involved.
can meet
yeah.
the-
If you can meet the shoreline zoning space requirements,
Right.
lot frontage.
you need lot frontage.
Yeah, yeah. So those are like those shoreline zoning dimensional standards still apply. So,
Another question?
Yes. I'm John Schwander. I'm confused in the definitions under M, sanitary and potable water standards. It says, "The space and bulk standards, including but not limited to the minimum lot area and minimum land area per dwelling unit of the zoning district in which the lot is located, apply per dwelling unit."
which,
Help us find the page.
It's page 41,
is it page 41 of the zoning ordinance?
zoning.
So you're on page
Now I'm with
41,
you.
so it's M1. Is that where we are?
Correct.
Okay.
And I'm confused. What I'm hearing is I'm hearing two different things. One, these can only be on bigger lots that can meet area requirements, and that's what this seems to say. But further along, it says you can even put an accessory dwelling unit on a lot that's non-conforming for area, as long as it can not become more non-conforming.
Right, so the space and bulk standards, that's related to those standards.
So if you have a 2.5 acre lot, are you saying you have to have a 5 acre lot to put an accessory dwelling unit on it?
No.
No.
The accessory dwelling units never affect the density.
Right.
Okay, but that's really not what this is saying.
Right, so this is here, I think it was mirrored after the state language on the potable water standards. I didn't draft this section, but I think it was just to clarify the state standards for potable water, and most likely it's because it was written this way that it was, it has this language.
So this, it's the no additional dwelling units, and that does not apply to accessory
Right.
dwelling units. And so that's I think that's the issue, is there's two different dwelling units we're talking about. One is the additional dwelling units, and the other is the accessory dwelling units.
Yeah.
And additional dwelling units is what this is referring to, but accessory dwelling units, except in shoreland zoning, affects no other standards except things like, setbacks.
Okay, thank you.
I believe that that's correct. I mean,
Yeah,
if
so-
anybody finds a
Yeah,
mistake.
so in section 532, the accessory dwelling units, section that has all the standards for it.
209 again.
Yeah, on page 210, it does say, for the purposes of this section, an ADU outside of shoreline zone shall not be considered to be a dwelling unit for determining the required minimum lot area or net residential density. So I think that would take care of that concern.
Yeah, so that thing on page 210 sort of discounts what you were just reading.
But that's a really good question.
That's a great question.
Yeah,
It's very
It is a-
confusing, and that's a really good question.
Our zoning ordinance is kind of like that. You read one piece, but then you have to read other pieces, and it just,
One wishes you could rewrite the whole thing from beginning to end,
I know we keep adding to the
So
confusion.
we're going to meet twice a week, every week for the next 5 years.
So I can clarify that for you. In this case, an accessory dwelling unit under M1 would meet, outside of the shoreline zone, would meet the space and bulk standards because it wouldn't require any additional land area, thereby meeting that first portion. That answers your question?
I think so.
Okay. Yes. And then you're correct. If you have a non-conforming lot with regards to area, you could still permit and apply to get an accessory dwelling unit if you can meet all the other standards that are in place.
Including impervious surface.
Everything.
Yeah.
Lot
Yeah, that's
coverage,
what I would think so.
setbacks, et cetera, frontage, whatever it may be.
Yeah, so these are the main changes that have to do with LD 2003. I can take more questions about it, but before we move on to the public hearing, I do want to point out the changes that we made to the subdivision ordinance that have nothing to do with LD 2003.
Yep. So I think it makes sense to pause here while this stuff is fresh in our minds. We'll give the board a chance to ask any questions and discuss, and then we'll give the public a chance to ask any questions. And I would sort of ask if we can make that clarification between like questions that folks have about sections that might be confusing versus public comment about opinions about this, which would come in the public comment section. Does that distinction make sense to everyone? Okay, so if people have questions and want clarification, we can do that before the public hearing starts, after the board's had a chance. Board, any questions from the board? Maybe we're pretty much there. Yeah. Yep.
So in the various districts, there's always a provision for the maximum number of units for a new development building. And for some of them, it's 6, and for some of them, it's 8. And I just don't recall the rationale for limiting it to 6 when most of them are 8.
Oh, you're talking about for multifamily or
Yeah.
certain districts?
Multifamily, unless it's an affordable housing development, and
Yeah.
then it's different.
So that's because on those districts, they are districts that allow multifamily, but it actually kind of caps the number as you keep reading the document. In speaking with the town attorney, we thought that it would be difficult to keep that there, so it was kind of recommended to, exempt the affordable housing from
Right, I
it.
understand that part, but the part I'm asking about is why in the medium-density districts, there's a maximum of 6?
I
and in the
think
other
that is-
districts, it's a maximum of 8.
A really good question, and it has to do with whatever work the planning board was doing, maybe 10 years ago. As we look at the comprehensive plan, those are exactly what I mentioned. What I think the idea was to have these mixed-use districts and increase density, but
That's just a
does that
carry-
really
It's
make
a
sense
carry
to then?
forward.
It's just
you know-
carried over from the last one.
Yeah, I mean, that was language that was already there, and
So then I guess my question is, should we rethink that? Because why not make it the bigger number since our goal is to increase housing?
it's a non-LD 2003 related question, but in my personal opinion, I think that we do need to take a closer look to all these, because you're talking about districts that are on our growth area and are
Right, but
close to downtown, that I think we do have to take a second look at the requirements that are there right now in terms of density.
Right, but those numbers are all embedded in new red line language, right? So for instance, page 63, the very last item on page 63. It's a maximum of 6. For most of the other districts, it's a maximum of 8.
Yes, I think it was to clarify that, for instance,
But it's 6 in the rural zones too, right? Because I had the same.
the
sort
rural
of-
zones don't.
Oh, don't
allow
have
Don't have-
multifamily. Sorry.
right.
So it's the right. It's
It's a
sort of
medium density that
right.
has 6
It's the less dense of the
of the denser
options.
places.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So
And then the village, it's always 8.
yeah. Yeah.
Well, go ahead.
It's not always, but I think there's certain districts, I think the mixed-use one that had some,
I think
there's certain
medium.
districts that
I
have.
think the
a
only
cap.
6s were in the medium, and all the others in the village were 8.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't do what seems like the deep dive that you did, Wayne, to figure out exactly where. I kind of noticed that they were different, and I looked for a couple, and to me, I kind of said, that sort of kind of makes sense, where you have the medium density have a slightly lower number, and the higher density have a slightly higher number. I don't feel super strongly about it, but I think it seems like the sort of thing that we might tackle as part of the comp planning process too, is seeing.
Well,
But for purposes of this, I mean, we are changing that specific language, so why not
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
just
fair.
make the number the bigger number and have a little more housing allowed?
You mean remove the restriction
Or
that,
either make it 8 or make it something bigger than 8 if you
well,
want.
because aren't they already limited to 6 elsewhere? That's the issue.
there are certain districts that I think limits it to 6.
My heart's in your place, but my question is twofold. One is, this is a hearing and a change of the zoning about 2003. And so if this is if we're introducing something new that's restrictive, we should not do that. But I don't think we should change it today without discussing where else might we want to change it.
Okay, I mean,
Second, kind of just one other point, which is, while this is a part of the comp plan, speaking with the housing task force hat on, I'm concerned that the comp plan is 2 years off from making changes, and I believe we should do a review early spring about what, immediate fixes of that type might we find.
Right. And I understand it's somehow a carryover, but I was focusing most heavily on red line
Red line,
language, which
yeah.
is new.
Yeah.
And this is all in the red line language.
Yeah, we wanted to exempt the affordable housing developments from that.
The
So that
issue
was
is
really
the
the purpose
6,
of-
the, oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my thought was if we're adding language, if we're creating new language, why not
Yeah,
change the number
why-
to something more consistent with our ultimate goal?
As long as it's not, there's Carolyn.
So this was to go back to, yeah. So on,
Oh,
for
I don't know if you
instance,
know, see the issue that we're discussing, because I don't know if it's, you know.
I think I can clarify it. So for instance, on that section 404, the medium density residential district 1, right? It allows multifamily, but it says on that A purpose, and then go down to page 61, it tells you the uses that are permitted, the uses that are subject to subdivision review, and then it says the following uses are subject to site plan review regardless of size. And then number 10 is multifamily dwellings.
Oh, you just moved it from there to there.
Yeah, so it
It was already there.
Yeah, I
yeah,
understand
it used
that.
to say maximum of 6 units per building, so now we just say it's subject to section 404F2. So you have to go down the next page and go to that F, and then it's down there. So it was just kind of moved.
This is,
So I don't know
We're
if this
not
is. the-
adding the restriction, it was already there. We just,
But there is an issue there, so I don't know if this is the appropriate time and place, but it seems to me that we have an arbitrary number limiting the size of a multifamily development, and I was wondering if we had thought that through.
So I would say you should flag that as a separate project. One of the things jumping out to me is public utilities and private utilities in the area, and I don't know the history of that number, but I don't know if it's tied to lot requirements when you have an area which is on septic. So I think it's a good flag, but I think you guys should maybe put that in the post-LD
as an agenda item, I think we
2003
would all be interested in
yeah.
to not.
what restrictions should we be looking at before the comp?
Yeah, the only thing I will note, I'm glad you brought that up, because there's actually a misuse of terminology here. So in cases where you point that out, that we added under other standards, and we have reference to that 6 or 8, so at least it's on page 63 and 67, the incorrect term was listed as multifamily development. A multifamily development, as you know, is something in a subdivision. It's different than a multifamily dwelling. So on page 63 for F2, while you're talking about it, hopefully Wayne can let me know if I missed any on the fly. And then on page 67, under F2, that should actually read multifamily dwellings
Yeah.
instead of development.
Okay, and I could tell you the other pages where,
That would be lovely if
Similar
I
language.
missed some on the fly. I'm glad you brought it up, because otherwise that would have snuck in.
it's also on
Oh,
page
yeah.
76, 96, and 100, and 103.
Wait.
Okay.
Why is multifamily dwellings are
63.
subject to a max?
63,
67.
67,
It's just that we
70,
can't use the word
76,
development, because it's,
96.
Use the word
96.
building.
Can you,
100,
Yep.
and 103.
Sorry, I'm just keeping a record of all these
yeah,
little changes.
can you
so
repeat
we-
that slower, Wayne?
Yeah, 63, these are the pages
Yep,
where.
and then I'll go through and check
Right.
it.
So
Okay.
page 63, page 67, page 76,
Yep.
page 96, page 100, page 103.
Okay.
Word,
So while you guys continue your conversation, I will go through and wordsmith and come back up at the end when you review all your changes of.
can I ask one more
Okay, folks.
question? Is multifamily dwelling the right unit, not multifamily building?
We call them multifamily dwellings, so we like to use consistent terminology,
Good.
so I would
I
keep
mean, I
that.
want the consistent
Yeah,
terminology,
yep.
but dwelling means a multifamily, you can have a multifamily dwelling of 8 units.
Yes, which is why it's so
of implies it's
important,
like-
because that is in one structure. Multifamily development is something different in a subdivision, more like a condo, not in one
I'm just thinking of a
structure.
dwelling unit, which I understand, and that has 8 dwelling units.
Multifamily dwelling means all in one building.
Okay, with, a dwelling has dwelling units in it.
Yeah.
maybe we should
In the case of
revise
multifamily,
the
yes.
subdivision
In this
to
case, yes.
redo the, so that we're
I mean,
able
it's
to
not
use
tonight's
development after multifamily, because right now we're not able to do that. And, yeah, that
More
was a
little
good
things.
catch.
Yep.
So yes, Wayne, I think that's something that I mean, a while ago, in looking at the zoning ordinance, have flagged areas that I wonder if they actually help us, meet the comprehensive plans, New England Village walkability and affordable housing goals.
And the thing that I'm wondering about is whether a developer might find it economic to build, a building with 10 units, but he can't because of this. So
Yeah, those are very good
that can make the
points.
difference in an economic viability of a project. So.
Especially in the village areas, where we have that.
Okay, so just two more technical things. On page 60 of the subdivision ordinance, there's the term outstanding river segment, and I didn't see any definition for that, and I don't know what that means.
Yeah, so my memory of that, so remember back, I think it was in January or February, I think January is when the planning board talked about adding the state standards to mirror the language of the state subdivision review criteria. So the river one is one that, I think we kept that language there, but we don't really, I believe we don't really have any outstanding rivers.
But I don't even know what it means. And
I think
it should have been in the definitions, I would think.
This was a long time ago, but I think it means like very, very big river that none of them are going through.
It's defined in state
Yeah, I
law somewhere?
believe so, yeah.
'Cause it wasn't defined here, so,
No.
okay. All right.
Is that new language?
Yeah, so this was going to get to the last part I didn't open up the slide on.
Oh,
Under state standard, it's red line language in our new ordinance. So just a language thing on page 63 of the subdivision ordinance, where it says,
you're back there.
under the red line language, all farmland within the proposed subdivision has been identified, should it be shall be rather than has been?
So this would be a copy and paste from the state standard.
Okay, so you want it to read exactly the same?
I think that's the style we were going for.
Okay.
And I should actually check because it's been several months and they might have changed it.
And the same thing on 67, it says has not been in the past, but it seems to me what was meant is shall not be, not has not been, but
Yeah.
because it's any law is meant to be prospective, not talking about something that already happened, but I'll just leave it to you to see if that's appropriate, if you want to change that or not.
Right, I think with all the other ones, that's kind of how the subdivision, that review criteria. That
Okay.
I think that is backward facing, because I think that's saying,
I just don't understand the tense in essence,
yes, that if you have violated, then you have to go to get a further review. So you have to have a clean record,
Okay.
I think is what that's what it reads to me as.
Anybody else have, before we dive into the subdivision, we can do that a little bit later. Anybody else have questions or clarifications on the zoning section? I lost it again. I had one and I didn't write the page number down.
I'll just make the comment that we have spent a lot of time
Yeah.
going through every piece of this. I hope that there aren't errors.
Well,
but we
since
have considered it.
Since our last meeting that we talked about this, it has then gone back to actual real legal review, because before the town attorneys only had a time to very briefly look at it. So then it came back and there has been lots of iterations from the last draft that you saw to this, proposed amendment draft. So it's okay if you have lots of questions, because we have made lots of changes.
I have, I think, a pretty minor one on page 42. It references,
Of zoning?
of zoning, yep.
Okay.
It references the zoning board of appeals, I believe. Don't we just have a board of appeals, not a zoning board of appeals?
We do have a Board of Appeals, so,
Can we just strike the word zoning? So that it's not, we don't have to assemble a board just for that one
right.
division. 42. Section 202.b.2. Extension of use.
Hold on.
That one jumped out at me for some reason. There may be other ones
Oh,
that I
it's a
missed.
correction that you want us
Yeah,
to
yeah,
make to
yep.
the existing?
Just strike the word zoning, because our Board of Appeals is just called the Board of Appeals, not the Zoning Board of
Oh, I
Appeals.
see.
Very minor, just, just while we're at it kind of a thing. Yeah, I really think we have put in, I mean, as that slide back at the beginning that showed the timeline and listed all the meeting dates, I mean, it was, 6, 7, 8 meetings where we've talked about this. It's been a big lift for staff and I know for Cecilia doing a lot of the nitty-gritty, for Caroline, for Nick Adams, for the attorney. I mean, it's been a lot.
It's been a group process with lots
Yeah.
of track changes going back and forth
Yeah.
from people, so you might find,
Yeah.
yeah.
This is probably a good place to just acknowledge the fact that I've not been involved here in those conversations. I did, however, want to let you all know that I did do some homework, and I have reviewed several of the meetings.
Oh, great.
In lead up to this, including, if I can find it, I can tell you which ones. March 2nd, April 5th, the workshop on August 2nd, and the page turn on September 9th. I did not find the August 13th, 2023 meeting that was referenced in the handout, but I've reviewed all the remaining meetings.
Great.
Great.
That's a lot of homework.
that-
Yeah, we did have a workshop and
No,
we-
that is, thanks, Dave, because that is an I that needs
Just
to be for
for the
your
record.
vote. Yep, it needs to be dotted, so, yep. Okay, do we have any clarifying questions before we open the public comment period?
I have one more.
Okay, yeah, of course.
So you talked about all the changes that the legal team made, and I presume that is consistency in language and terminology, but was there anything substantive or policy related that should be flagged?
So when the legal team, it was sort of back and forth with Nick Adams, the code officer, and then we had to sometimes change things around.
What's practical, I mean,
Right, so that's when a lot of that sanitary water and potable water standards was added, and then that's when we're like, oh, it makes sense to add this to all new dwellings, because you should be meeting these standards, and Nick would already enforce that. But then when we added this, I believe some of the language also makes it so that it's required to test the potable water for things like PFAS, whereas before it wouldn't have been. And then,
in terms of the limits we set, that's what is the.
yeah,
sort of
so for the
policy.
affordable housing density bonus, that requirement from the state, we didn't really make much change. We're mostly just meeting the minimum state requirements for that. For the extra dwelling unit allowance, the planning board is, being much more permissive than the state and allowing, them in cases where, not requiring somebody to have a vacant lot or vacant of any housing units to build everything all at once, sort of capping the number based on what could
That was, so
potentially.
none of that was changed.
Right.
Oh, in terms of the last time we
I'm
talked
just
about?
asking, yeah, I'm just asking in the legal review, you said there's been a lot of changes since all the work that we've done. So I'm
Okay.
trying to make sure that nothing
Nothing that would have,
substantive was changed
Yes,
that we
nothing-
don't know about.
that would have affected your policy decisions.
That's all I
think,
asked.
yep.
It's okay.
Everything else
Sorry.
is the lawyer's
Excited.
job.
I went looking
Caroline,
for
do you
that
want to
stuff.
clarify anything?
Yeah, I'll just clarify that at the last meeting, you guys made a lot of policy decisions that did impact the language. And so the ADU language changed slightly because my understanding is the planning board decided in cases where you had one
Yes,
structure, two single-family, or duplex only, you wanted to allow one ADU per lot. So that did allow for some consolidation, and one of the changes presented tonight was to clarify that if someone had three single-family homes, you did not want to allow an ADU. There were some changes kind of made at the last meeting. I think there was some confusion in the nonconformance section. That's been cleaned up a little bit because the nonconformance section talks about nonconforming uses and nonconforming structures, which are two entirely different things. So there's been some cleanup there. I think the biggest change is actually more simplistic language in the section clarifying when you can add additional dwelling units, because before you were more mirroring LD 2003 in the growth area, out of the growth area, with all these other scenarios, and you guys kind of streamline that with outside of the growth area, go up to 3, in the growth area, go up to 4. So I do feel like this is a cleaner condensed based upon some of those policy changes, if that helps you.
We sort of coalesced around the principle of fairness and trying to come up with a standard that could be applied as equally as possible across lots. Acknowledging, of course, that every lot is different and there's way more standards than we could possibly take into account, with the here. But I think, in general, that was the principle: fairness and simplicity. So
the subdivision incorporates some of the changes you previously discussed, like Cecilia said, to mirror the state standard, adding Freeport standard. And then the shoreland, I kind of envisioned that we were going to make some additional changes, but after some back and forth with DEP, one thing you will notice, based upon some feedback from the code officer of how people in the shoreland are questioning the accessory dwelling units, is it was clarified in the zoning ordinance, in the accessory dwelling unit section, that you still need to meet those certain shoreland zoning standards. But all your policy decisions are adequately reflected. It just does look a little bit different.
Yeah, the language got a lot of work from our town attorneys and Caroline and Nick Adams, and yeah. So the last thing to discuss too is the changes to the subdivision ordinance that had to do with those state requirements that are different. So we kind of like snuck those in there, but because a while ago, I believe the town council wanted to get this back and have it already incorporated there. And I can show you those changes too, but I want to know if anyone else has any more questions about this.
I think yes, the subdivision stuff is pretty.
It's pretty straightforward. Here, I'll just show it in my screen. Yeah. So it's basically, a while ago, we started cleaning up the subdivision ordinance. We had a lot of references to old documents and old names that don't exist anymore. For instance, Aquamain. We weren't able to streamline it to just, we ended up with, Maine Water Company. There were errors sometimes with cross-references or definitions that didn't match zoning. So there was a lot of general updates and cleanup, nothing related to LD 2003. And we also added some state standards, the ones that we're talking about, the farmland and timber harvesting, which you guys had a hard time with the last time because it had all that, it was copied and pasted from the state, and our previous planning board member, Robert, he's like, if I can't make sense of this and I'm a forester, then nobody can. We did ask the town attorney to help us, and we were able to simplify it a little bit, but we just cut one section from the state, but the rest is the same mirror language from the state. So those is what I wanted to point out on the subdivision ordinance that were unrelated, and we kind of just put them there.
Yep, okay.
Great. Any clarifying questions from the public? And I don't want to forget about our neighbors on Zoom.
Yes.
If anyone on Zoom has or whatever, phone call or however you connect to these things, if anybody has a question, please
Raise your hand.
raise your hand, literally or virtually. Yeah, and please, you do still have to go to the podium. Yes, sorry about that.
And I know that I walked through the state standards really quickly. It's mostly because we've been talking about this for many meetings, so if nothing was clear, please ask. I think I was trying not to repeat myself too much.
Thanks. I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this, but you said it's for clarification. I was looking at the state's guidelines, and then I think it's reiterated here, but subdivisions that exist that have restrictive covenants, that have lot size and setbacks, and maybe even as like a very restrictive area for building on each lot, those still, this state law that does not override any of that. If you live in like a 30 dwelling unit single family subdivision, that's not going to be affected.
You're
That's
correct,
right,
yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
So,
Except for the accessory dwelling unit?
No,
Even
no.
that restrictive covenants
yeah.
can
Deed covenants
Yeah,
will win.
so unfortunately,
Yep.
you know, if you live in a subdivision or if your deed has a restrictive covenant saying that you cannot have, you know, another unit there, you're not going to, you know, you're,
Or fortunately, depending on your point of view.
yes.
Okay, that's all I needed to clarify. Thank you.
Can you say your name for the record? Sorry.
Sure, it's Heather. The last name is spelled Aguiar.
Great.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Okay, so for the public comment period tonight, we are going to add. Oh, sorry. Jeez, I don't even. Yeah.
Oh, when we say raise your hand, it's mostly for the people on Zoom.
Yeah.
Folks here in the room.
Yeah, you can
it's
make
that virtual hand on Zoom, but for
Yeah, you can
in
make
the
a
room,
line
you
at
can
the podium
Just walk
if-
straight to the
If
podium.
anybody else. No, we're just going for clarifying questions.
Clarifications, right?
Yep.
Hi, my name is Greg Schinberg. I live on Beach Hill. It might be a complicated question. I own the old Libby Place, which is technically part of the 10 Penny subdivision. I have 3 acres, and I haven't been to the previous meetings, and I did meet with Ms. Smith. For the ADU, I have 3 acres. Am I permitted or not permitted to have a second unit on my property?
I'm not sure
And I
about.
know that my deed might have a separate effect, which is separate, but I mean from a standpoint of 3 acres and having 2 separate units that are not attached.
It's very hard. So I would say that any guidance that we give to specific properties would have to be very heavily caveated. Like, we can't really get into the specifics on specific properties, but I could say in a general sense, if you live in a zoning district, so let me back up. So an accessory dwelling unit is not going to count against your density standards. So as long as you can meet setback standards.
Which I can, yeah.
So
You already have 2 on a.
No, I have one single house on that property.
So most lots, I want to speak in generalizations just to, you know, for simplicity's sake, most lots with a single family home would be able to add an ADU.
Or a two-family home.
Or, yes,
Or convert mine
assuming
to a
that
two-family,
there are
yes.
no deed covenants and assuming that space and bulk standards can be met. But
You
the
meet your subdivision requirements too.
But whether the 3-acre lot can take 2 homes, that's a whole different.
Yeah, it just depends. I mean, if you
I
have a
have to
stream
have
running up the
potable
middle,
water,
if you
I have to be able to drill a well, all those
yeah,
things.
and if you have, you know, you still have to meet your
Density.
Not density.
not density for ADUs. But
No,
you,
we're not talking about ADUs. He's talking about
oh, you asked about it.
I am asking about being able to add a second dwelling, and would that fall under the ADU?
If you could add a second, you can always add an ADU. If you want to add a second dwelling unit plus an ADU, the question is whether you, no, you just want to add an ADU.
I have a small 1,400 square foot house, hoping to give that to my son, who can't afford Freeport. I want to build another 1,400 square foot house up on the
So
hill.
that would not count as an ADU, so then you'd be in the second, right, so.
So that doesn't count.
75% or 1,100 square feet,
Right.
whatever is less. If you did that, you could.
So I could do an 1,100 square foot second home,
Or up to 75% of the original home.
which is around the same, yeah.
More or
Actually, that
less,
was kind of
whichever
our
is
part.
less, more or less, that's right on.
But
Yeah,
I am-
it's
I
hard to
am
get,
limited
again.
To that total.
I'm going to keep repeating myself. It's hard to get, I don't want us to be,
No, I know there's some technical stuff that I have to get.
Yeah.
Maybe just one more clarification. When you talk about the 1,100 square feet, does that include a garage and anything within there, or is it just the living space? And is that in the definition?
it is in the definition, yeah.
I won't waste the time with a lot of people here.
Yeah.
I can look all that stuff up here.
This is one area has been in the previous meeting really confusing for people. It's like, what's the difference between that additional dwelling and the ADU? And, you know,
The answer is, it depends.
the answer is it depends.
Sure.
So the ADU, you know, can't be as big as the house. There's like the size restriction. And, the additional dwelling doesn't. The ADU does not require you to have a larger lot. The additional dwelling would. So it all really
I
depends.
believe that the garage would be the garage would be considered part of the main house, and it's the,
Garage could be an accessory structure. I mean, so the gross floor area, just to read that definition, is the sum of the gross horizontal areas of all floors of a building measured from the exterior face of exterior walls or from the center line of a wall separating two buildings, but not including interior parking spaces, i.e. a garage, loading spaces for motor vehicles, or any space where floor-to-ceiling height is less than 6 feet, so like a crawl space.
So I have more research to do. I know you had a lot of meetings to get to here, so I don't want to burn any more of your time up. Thank you.
No, I think it's a distinction that keeps coming up again and again, and so it is helpful for us to think about what the difference between an
Yeah, and it's
ADU and another dwelling unit.
It is complicated. I know you got to follow state standards, and you're trying to create more housing
sure.
here. Thanks very much.
Yep. All right, and this time I'm going to look out there, not jump the gun. Anyone else have clarifying questions?
If anyone in Zoom has questions, you can just raise your virtual hand and we will allow you to speak.
So before we will entertain a motion for a public hearing, we will be limiting to the comment tonight to 3 minutes. And that is for anyone who wishes to comment in the room or on Zoom. And I think, Caroline, are you going to be the keeper of the clock? Or Cecilia has the button. And trying to think if there's anything else. I think that's it. The last thing before we open the public hearing, in the spirit of dotting I's and crossing T's, as Dave did, I need to make a disclosure, which is that I recently went back to work for a company, and my role is primarily related to the production of ADUs. This was very recent, and it's not. So it wasn't even on my radar for most of the first meetings, but it is now. I went back to work last Monday, at least officially. And because it's an employee-owned company, I do own a very, very small stake of the company. So I just want to put that out there. And if anyone has an issue with that, I do not feel that it in any way impairs my ability to, make a judgment about these regulations that we're proposing. But I do want to be by the book and say that I technically have a very small stake in ADUs. So does anybody have an issue with that? Either here or out there? All right. Now.
Somebody has a raised hand.
Oh, good. Somebody's going to.
Kathy, I'm going to allow you to talk. You can unmute yourself.
Hi, my name's Kathy, and I have a clarifying question. Just wondering how you came up with the 1,100 square foot for the maximum ADU square footage. Just a little bit of background that, to me, yep, go ahead.
Sorry, I just want to make sure I understood your question. You want to know a little bit of a background of why it was decided that the maximum size could be up to 1,100 square feet?
Or 75%.
Yes. No, I mean, that's the maximum, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right, right.
Sure.
Just because when my mother returned to our family home, my daughters lived with her occasionally to take care of her. 1,100 square feet seems pretty small in order to have caregivers helping an elderly person that wants to die in the home.
Sure, I can take a stab of going back into a little bit of background of that. So what I noticed is that, for instance, on the comprehensive plan, or back in the day when Freeport, who was ahead of its time compared to many of our neighboring communities, did have an ADU ordinance. The maximum size, I believe, was 800 square feet. And 800 square feet is actually really common maximum size for accessory dwelling units. And I believe it might have been 40% or 800 square feet. So at some point, and in the comprehensive, after the previous comprehensive plan, it was noted that 800 square feet was a little restrictive, so they just kept it at 40%. But I think when they did that, they inadvertently, might have made it difficult for people who, say, I live in an 875 square feet house, so then I would have, not really been able to do that unless I got down to 40% of that, which would have been extremely tiny. So,
Yeah, the intent was for the board to be fairly permissive. 1,100 square feet is actually fairly large if you look at all surrounding communities' accessory dwelling unit. I mean, I think the intent, it is a balance, and 1,100 square feet is not huge, but there is always...
A large two-bedroom. A large
Yeah, it's a-
two-bedroom apartment is 1,100 feet.
Yeah.
And I think it's always a balance of
right.
lowering barriers, but doing it in a way that respects, not just property owners' rights, but also sort of what I think of as abutters' rights, and sort of balancing those two perspectives.
Because unlike the additional dwelling unit that you can put on your house, in your lot, the ADU does not require you to have a larger lot. So it's really intended to be, a more low-key and accessory to your primary house. So it really is supposed to be, a smaller size. And another thing this planning board did too is give direction for us to remove the one-bedroom maximum, which is our current ordinance says that you can only have one bedroom. So the planning board was much more permissive by giving direction for staff to remove that restriction.
Still got to meet your subsurface wastewater disposal
Yes,
requirements.
yes, you
but-
still have to meet your
Yep.
subsurface wastewater disposal, so that is going to be hard for a lot of people. But just like with the high construction costs, we're making some
Septic.
changes, but it might not be,
But can I just repeat that the goal was to make these as large as, we purposefully made them larger than the standard. So 1,100 feet is a large two-bedroom. But we were sensitive to not wanting to call all single-family zoning in the town two-family zoning and enable you to build two houses on a single-family lot, because this doesn't affect other restrictions.
Yeah.
Except,
I mean, I'm proud to say that Freeport does not have much of a single-family zoning because we do allow duplexes.
Well, yes, we-
But yes, I
yeah.
know what you mean. It's just like keep that neighborhood character. So I think the intent was to keep it like that. So it's not a maximum of 1,100 square feet. To clarify, it's 75% of the existing structure or 1,100 square feet, whichever is less.
Yep.
All right, thanks so
Kathy?
much.
Okay, thank you, Kathy.
That's an interesting point. So we're on page 210. We're just kind of, Wayne is bringing up a clarification about the way that this is written, this standard is written on page 210. So we're in section 532, which is the renamed accessory dwelling unit, formerly accessory apartments, now accessory dwelling units.
It seems slightly ambiguous the way it's written, because it gives you little I, double I, and then triple I. So it looks like you could qualify under little I alone because it says or. Normally, when you put or, it means that you,
whichever is less should be in the front.
exactly, that's the.
The gross area of an ADU shall be no more than,
Yeah.
The lesser of.
the lesser of
That's the
1,
intent,
2,
that's-
or 3.
If that's the intent, that would be the fix. Yeah.
I see it.
This was a recommendation by the code officer.
It's just that whichever is less down in number 3, it looks like it's part of 3, but it's really part of A.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, I mean, the other thing you could do is just make that go all the way to the left. Just don't put it, you see what I'm saying? If it's part of A.
What about the gross floor area of an ADU may be no more than the
1,100 square feet, subject to the following.
Oh, yeah, there you go. Yeah, so if you say maybe no more than 1,100 square feet.
Nor more than,
Yeah, nor more than, yeah,
Right.
that's how.
yeah. I agree. It's not super clear.
Oh,
You got it?
the code officer is the one who would be enforcing this, so this
But he
is the way it was.
We're doing him a favor.
This is going to be around for 100 years.
It has to be understandable to the person who's trying to
definitely.
comply with it.
Can somebody clarify what the suggestion is to rewrite here? I'm trying to keep
Yeah.
track of the amendments, and then we'll summarize them at the end.
It should be, under A, it should be the gross floor area of an ADU may be no more than 1,100 square feet of gross floor area.
Or 75.
Nor,
And-
nor,
Or and subject to the following two,
nor more than.
Okay.
Yeah.
right, no more than 75% and,
That gives the perception that you can go to 1,100, which is not the case.
Yeah.
no, it's,
And nor more than, nor more than.
That's confusing.
Well,
Gross floor area of an ADU may be no more
Okay,
than the
I'll play
least
with you guys,
of.
continue talking, and
All
I'll
right.
give you a solution. How's that?
okay, that's perfect.
sorry.
All right.
Why not the, I'm sorry, no, no,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
trying to move on. The gross floor area of an ADU, I'm sorry. The gross floor area of an, I'm sorry, I lost it.
Yep, no, that's all right. If it comes back to you.
Solution when we come back.
Yeah, I have one other, if you want one more suggestion, you could just eliminate the last one and just put, or 1,100 square feet, whichever is less after little a, little I, and double I.
Oh, yeah, that,
I have an easy solution for you guys. I should have sat here tonight. So you can change 7A, to the first sentence to read, "The gross floor area of an ADU may be the lesser of," and then a semicolon, and then have 1, 2, 3, but then number 3, put a period after area, and just strike whatever is left.
No more than the lesser of.
Yeah, so you get that right up front.
So it's just-
I think that's what I said.
yeah, no more than the lesser of. If you just add then the lesser of before the colon.
Yeah.
Yep, and then just strike that
And
at the
then,
bottom.
and
So you
strike
get
it at the bottom, right. That's
That work
all.
better?
That's much simpler.
I'll add it to the list.
Thank you, Caroline.
Another question.
Well, a comment if I could.
No comments
Hold on.
yet,
We gotta,
sorry.
yeah, we're going to open the public comment period.
because we have to officially open it.
Yes.
We might have already scared some people away, but we're still on the
Yeah.
question phase.
Well, this is unfortunately how these things, yeah, it's not always fun
Can
and
we
streamlined
mix them all
process.
together and move along?
The public comment and the, yeah,
I mean, if there are more,
I think a motion to open the public comment period is appropriate at this point. Somebody wants to make one? Mitch?
so moved.
And a second? From everybody down there?
No, just one person,
Yes.
Rosemary.
Yeah, Rosemary, sorry, we gotta pick a person, so we'll give it to Rosemary.
And now.
And then all in favor? All right, that's unanimous.
Now you may.
Now the public comment period is open. Sorry for that procedural. It is what it is on these bigger issues.
My name's Gary Laughlin, and just about this whole thing with the 11,000 square feet, I thought it was interesting in the Portland Press Herald, excuse me, about 2 weeks ago, apparently Cape Elizabeth has decided on 11,000 square feet as,
1,100, oh, that's interesting.
I mean, 1,100 square feet, yes, as their setting to for an ADU, so.
Do you have other comments, Gary? Because we did start the clock for you, so I just want to make clear.
Oh, my only other comment would be that I, really appreciate, I think that the planning board has really tried to be responsive to the citizens of the town and have made adjustments to the ADU opportunities that, will hopefully benefit the town and the people of it. Thank you.
Thanks. All right, don't be shy now that the public comment period is open. Anybody in the room who wants to comment can do so at the podium. Yeah.
Again, my name is Heather, Aguiar, last name. This has nothing to do with this is more about the maybe comprehensive plan. Is that too off topic, or I figure I'll never make it to another planning board meeting, so why not?
Go for it.
It's a public comment period.
Okay.
Any respectful and appropriate comments are welcome here, I guess.
Alrighty. So the one thing, I love living in Freeport. I've lived here for about 20 years. I grew up in Maine. I'm excited to see the town grow, and I'm excited for this. I didn't make it to the workshop, but I'm sure I wanted to. I wanted to hear more about the plan. I participated in the surveys. One thing that has really changed in Freeport since I moved here, and granted, I did grow up in northern Maine, so maybe I'm a little biased, but I did notice that the amount of light pollution in town has increased exponentially. It used to be, I lived between Freeport and Brunswick. The Brunswick sky was always bright, and Freeport now is just, you cannot see anything but just sky glare in that direction. So one thing that I personally think would be nice as we're putting in more dwelling units and as the town is growing, if there could be something going forward where we can just maybe even have provisions to decrease light pollution. And I think there's a misconception that means oh, you won't be able to have outdoor lights or you won't be able to light your streets. But I've been in so many communities, especially out west, that have beautifully lit streets, tons of street lights, tons of lighting, and they just direct it downward. And it's a lot easier to do that while you're building than it is to try and go back afterward if it ever, when these things maybe become, maybe they don't seem important now, maybe they will someday. We are supposedly the gateway to Katahdin, which is a international dark sky park. It would just be nice, I think, for the community to be able to have that quality of life of living in Maine and not have to go into a little LL Bean tent during the holidays and they show you what the Milky Way looks like because you can't see it anymore from your homes. So that would be just the little bug that I wanted to put in your ear in in the public comment period.
Thank
you.
It's there.
There are meteor showers expected tonight, so I hope we could fix this really fast.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think that would be, it would be great to bring up during the comprehensive plan. We do have some standards for the downtown, more, in the village area with the design review that has some lighting standards, but it's, if the town wants to further explore, adding some provisions to kind of try to minimize that, we can look into that in the future.
So since you mentioned that, just one more comment is when you put in, replaced all the streetlights with the LED lights, I personally was really nervous because those can be quite bright. They're a lot brighter than the fluorescent ones they would have replaced, but I thought whoever did that did such a nice job and made sure the ones downtown are the full cutoff, the ones out on out of town that don't have the full cutoff. I would prefer that they had some sort of cutoff, but they didn't choose the bright glaring white bulbs. They chose a nicer, warmer bulb that is just, you're not blinded when you're driving under them or toward it. And so it can be done. It can be done that you have beautifully lit streets and you can still see the stars.
This was one of the first, when I first joined the planning board, I think it was 2017. I remember one of the very first meetings I attended, there were 2 streetlights out here that had different color temperatures, and everybody was asked to, hey, on your way out tonight, check it out and vote for which color temperature you like better. And so somebody kind of orchestrated that process, and we chose the warmer. We, as being a community, not a planning board, but the community chose the warmer color, and I wholeheartedly agree. It was a good choice.
So that comment was off topic, but I want to make one comment because we do have a lot of people on Zoom and a fair number in the room, just that the comp plan process will involve a lot of public reach out. You'll be hearing a lot about it, and it's super important that everybody try to help where they can. Particularly in the spring, the first part, what we learned tonight is that the first few months, most of the work will be around inventorying what exists today and reviewing not too much work. And then sort of as we get towards April and into the summer, there'll be a lot of public comment periods and workshops and stuff like that.
Other public comments tonight? We'll do in the room first, but I guess since you folks in the room aren't exactly jumping to the podium, we can open it up to Zoom as well. So if anybody on Zoom wants to comment, we'll make sure that we get to everybody.
Yeah. So if anyone on Zoom wants to comment, can you please raise your virtual hand and I will allow you to speak?
Oh, boy.
There's that Jeopardy music in my head again, right?
Had to go home early.
People are being quite quiet today.
I know.
Did a good job.
Okay.
My name's Dave Canepa. I live on Wolf's Neck, and I have a small non-conforming lot. So setbacks are a problem. But my neighbor is the state park where I'm not really encroaching on anybody. And that part of the state park is never going to be developed according to the last two rangers because it's too wet back there. So what I'm hearing over and over again is no exceptions to these setbacks. But I think they need to be looked at on an individual basis because there's nothing there but trees and swamp.
Apply for a variance, right?
Yeah, is there a variance process?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I think it would be really hard to get a variance for that, but I don't know enough about that process, really. My understanding of the variance process is that you have to basically show hardship, which would mean that you'd have to show that you have no use of your property, which sounds like there's already a home on it, so you have a use of it.
Well, there's an existing dwelling, a
Right.
small
Yeah.
cottage,
Yeah, yeah.
which I'd like to expand, but I can't do with the setbacks that are there.
And
But
the
it's-
setbacks are underlying, I mean, the whole zoning district has those same setbacks, right?
The whole what?
The whole zoning district, that you're in the rural residential 1, probably, right? And so that's a district-wide setback.
Right. But everybody in that district is not surrounded by forest and an unusable area of the state park.
Yeah, that's
So
something that we.
I'm just saying that you're not going to encroach on those setbacks at all is kind of out of line as far as I'm concerned. You need to look at things individually.
It would get tricky if we looked at things individually because, I think the whole purpose of having zoning is to have fairness. So once you start having that discrepancy over, yes, you can do it because you're next to a forest, or you can't do it, it might raise a lot of red flags for a lot of people. So it's much more complicated.
Every piece of property doesn't fit into the box of that residential district.
Certainly true, and certainly, I think, part of the challenge of writing good zoning language and why
Yeah.
it's a constant process.
And
So,
for
yeah,
instance-
it's certainly something that we could explore. I think there might or there might not be legal ways to approach that. I honestly don't know.
And I
Well,
hope you
there
have
is-
talked to the code officer already to see your particular
I have.
situation.
He said that you haven't approved any variant in over 2 years and probably would not.
Right, so that's the likelihood is one question, but the process is clear. The variance process is the only way you could go, so you could try it.
Okay, I'll do that. Thank you.
Yeah. One thing that's good to do is, for instance, if you get into a certain situation where, and I've noticed this in a lot of towns, where you have certain setback requirements or minimum lot sizes, and then you look at a neighborhood, and the whole neighborhood, almost pretty much none of the houses conform to that, then it's a time to revisit the standards of that district zoning when it's not working for most
Well,
people.
like I say, in a big area, everything doesn't fit into the box. You can go into the village and you can spit from one house to the next. And that's not a problem,
All right,
so.
thanks.
I keep forgetting to.
Any other comments from folks here in the room or virtually?
I'm going to try to.
Hi, my name's Leanne Sargent, live on East Street, and I would like to make the comment that I would like to see some zoning revisited in this town where there are places that are zoned for rural access that are kind of outdated, and areas very easily that should be commercial or Village 1, Village 2. And they would be ideal places for more affordable housing, whether it was, for accessible housing or just changing the zoning so that, a 2.5 or 5 acre lot could be more accessible for affordable housing in the area. Specifically on South Street, on either side of West, there are 3 homes built right next to each other. They all look alike. On the other side of West Street, it's rural, so it doesn't even qualify to be developed or added to, and it's easily a large enough lot where that could be providing extra housing, and it's right within walking distance to town. Places like that and other areas that are just really their zoning is out of date, and the zoning should be revisited so that we could apply some of these new amendments to many different areas. Thank you.
Thanks.
That's a great comment, and I really hope that you participate in the comprehensive plan, because that's the opportunity the residents have and the community have to say, hey, I think our existing zoning might not be working, or let's revisit this. So
That's particularly what we'll be looking at.
and we need your input.
And
And it's all
And
on the
everyone's
table in a
involved.
way that it hasn't been for quite a while, so. Yep. Other comments? Like an auctioneer going once. Twice. Entertain a motion to close.
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Dave, all in favor? All right.
Do they cover all 3?
Nope. We have 2 more public hearings, technically.
Do we need to, yeah.
Yeah, we do. I mean, technically, yes, we need to move on to agenda item number 2, which is a public hearing for proposed amendments to Chapter 25, which is the Freeport subdivision ordinance. We've already talked a little bit about what these changes are, so unless anybody has any questions, I think it would make sense to go ahead and open this public hearing and see if anyone's had a change of heart, because it's your lucky day. You can comment again. Do I hear a motion to open the public hearing?
Motion.
And a second? Second. Give that one to Wayne. All in favor? All right, anyone who wants to make a comment? We're gonna run this one quicker. The auctioneer is gonna be faster. Any public comments? Going once? Twice on Zoom? I gotta look this way for Zoom. Do I hear a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
From Andrew. Mitch, you want the second?
Okay.
Great, all in favor? All right, there was agenda item number 2, come and gone. And item number 3 is the same thing, but for amendments to Chapter 65, the Freeport Shoreland zoning ordinance. So again, we have already talked about these changes.
Yep. We can briefly, it's mainly we wanted to make sure that the definitions match the zoning ordinance, and then there's just some minimus changes in terms of capitalizing single family or saying duplex instead of 2-family.
Yep. So mostly perfunctory changes. And we have a motion to open a public hearing for this one. Motion. Motion from Dave and a second from Wayne. All in favor? It's fun, isn't it? Any comments?
Exercise.
Going once? Twice?
Now we're making time.
Yeah, now we're. Is that a hand? Is that a
Oh,
hand?
we do have a hand. Hold on. Kirk, I'm going to allow you to talk. You can just unmute yourself. There you go.
Great, thank you. I appreciate you guys doing this. I've had late nights with you before. Question, I have a large parcel that has a small piece in shoreland. My house is in shoreland, but I have quite a bit of land out of shoreland that's part of this lot. So if I were to do an accessory dwelling unit, is the dwelling unit considered shoreland?
I think it would depend, and I think you would need to talk to the code officer to figure that out.
I have, but I'd like clarification though, because if I have 2 acres that are right abutting the shore, and I have 7 acres that are not abutting shore at all, how would, and my house is considered shoreland, how do I determine that I am or not sure? I mean, I think there needs to be clarification so that the codes officer can say, no, this is not shoreland.
Caroline?
And specifically, I have a barn that's 600 feet out of, and I want to make sure that it's not, even though it's 800 feet from my house, I want to verify that will not be considered shoreland, despite the fact that my house is.
Hi, Kirk, it's Caroline. Although we're not answering property-specific questions, generally
Hypothetical.
speaking, there are some cases in the shoreland zone for people that have oversized lots. If the accessory dwelling unit itself, the actual structure is in the shoreland portion, you need to meet the frontage and land area requirements. If you are an individual where your lot is big enough that you could meet all other standards and have that accessory dwelling unit outside of that shoreland zoning area, then that would not apply.
Is that possible to include in this document? Because I don't read that anywhere.
So we went back and forth with DEP on the language, and so the guidance from the state and DEP is that no amendments are required to shoreland zoning. They already interpret an accessory dwelling unit as an accessory structure under the table of land uses. They already consider that you need to meet any applicable standards, including the shore frontage and the lot area, which is why we just tried to add that standard to section 532. I think the biggest change for some of the shoreland properties is the removal of the municipal requirement for the water and sewer connection and the separation from the main dwelling.
Yeah, that's a big one for,
But I'm happy to have property-specific questions. I know some people had questions tonight. If they can't answer them, they can reach out to us. I'd encourage them to come do that between now and the time that this goes to council, if it goes forward tonight, which I would expect to be sometime in January.
So is that something that ultimately I can get in writing so that I know for certain that I'm all set? Or how is that going to work?
We'll be happy to set up a time to meet with you and go over it, and if a clarification is needed, which the interpretation is it's not, but we're happy to meet with individuals, go through site-specific situations, and if an amendment needs to be brought forward to the council, we can do that.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
thanks, Kirk, for that. That's the intersection of shoreland zone and everything else is always a exciting topic.
But that seemed like a clear answer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Any other, is that still, I can't see that far. I see that there's a hand, but I suspect it's still the
Oh.
same.
It's the same
Okay.
Kirk. I think he just,
Yeah, so unless anyone else has a comment on Zoom or otherwise.
I move to close.
Mitch moves to close. And do we have a second?
Second.
Second from Dave. All in favor? Great. All right. So, at the conclusion of our 3 items, now would be the opportunity. I think, Caroline, do you mind collating our suggested changes today, and we'll I don't know, how do we time stamp it somehow? What time is it? 7:40.
If you were going to make a motion tonight on the language in front of you, I think you could just simply clarify as amended at the meeting. There's a couple other typos that came up. So going through on Page 42, section 202B2, striking the word zoning. This is in the zoning ordinance. On page 63, under F2, multifamily developments should be changed to multifamily dwellings. On page 67, item 2 at the top, it would be F2. Again, multifamily development should be changed to multifamily dwellings. The other pages that Wayne referenced didn't have that inconsistency of terminology, so further amendment was not required there. And then, under accessory dwelling units, the first paragraph, about halfway down, it should read, "These standards are intended to allow one ADU." So that's keeping the word allow. Under 532.1, to reflect the intent of the planning board that in no case would a lot with an ADU ever have more than 3 units on it, that sentence would be slightly amended to read, "No more than 1 ADU may be created on any lot containing," insert either 1 or strike more and change it to 2, "existing or proposed single-family dwellings." Sorry, I should have noted we want to put a small number 1 between the first option of 1 or 2 dwellings. And then right before duplex, we want to add a little number 2, or 1 duplex dwelling, and dwelling should be singular.
Yep.
Then on page 210, 7A, the gross floor area of an ADU may be, we're striking no more than and changing it to the lesser of, ... And then under A3, adding a period under area and striking whatever is less. And then on page 211, there is notice of an incorrect cross-reference. On page 211, number 10, the second part of that sentence where it references section 201, referencing back to the potable water standards that Mr. Schwanda mentioned earlier. It should be 201.bigm.2. And those are the changes I have. I did not have any changes to the subdivision ordinance or the shoreland zoning ordinance noted tonight. Questions or anything I missed? Aaron?
I don't know how you caught that reference. That's,
Magical
but that
people.
other ones match what I had.
And that reading will serve as the as amended at
Yes.
the meeting?
Yes.
Yes, as
Yep,
read by
and-
town planner Caroline Pelletier at 7:41.
So in the version that, if you take action on this to recommend it, the version that comes out of the planning board, we switch the title to as recommended by the planning board, and it will have these changes incorporated into it. And then, of course, we'll continue to do another review. If there's other typos, someone's reading this tonight for fun, and they notice some typos, we can make non-substantive changes between now and council.
Great.
Sam?
Yeah.
I noticed when I was looking through the stuff, that in the part in the front where it tells what page it is, some of the numbers aren't quite right. Like it says ADUs on page 203, and it's really 209,
Oh, on
the
the
index.
table of contents, yeah,
maybe
we
a
will,
track
the track
changes.
changes
Yeah.
messes that all up.
Yep.
So when that's adopted, it will automatically
It'll fall,
update.
yeah,
Yeah.
it'll update, good.
It did make reviewing this confusing, though. I agree. I struggled.
Yep, that's a good question. Track changes is, what would we do without it, but also.
Especially with 4 reviewers.
Yeah, 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 it can, yeah. All right, so somebody, assuming there are no other questions or comments or anything from the board, somebody has the fun task of wrapping this all up in a motion to advance this, to recommend this to the council and find it consistent with the comprehensive plan, which, speaking for me personally, is fairly easy to do. Because I think it's quite clear that the guidance here is to focus on the guidance focuses rather on housing, and the existing comprehensive plan vision statement has a bullet point that talks exactly about that, and even a subsection, I believe, that talks about that. And Cecilia has helpfully printed out some relevant sections of our comprehensive plan and left them for us as handouts. So, if there's anybody who still hasn't memorized the comprehensive plan vision statement, it's right here in front of you, and you could reference that as you consider a motion. So, does anybody want to step up and make that motion? As a reminder, would need to reference both the changes as amended at the meeting as read by Caroline, and also reference the comprehensive plan and the ways in which these recommendations are consistent with said.
And the changes that were made were just to the zoning ordinance, so that would be for that
Only
one. We
that.
have 3 different motions to make,
three
one for
motions.
We need
each.
3 motions.
Yes, we do.
I did draft some, but I included some of the errors that we picked up before all the
I'm not
other
gonna do
errors.
it,
So
yeah.
they were already included, and you could cross that section out. Like you want to
You want
cross.
me to do it?
just
I know,
wanna
it's
cross all of
just
that.
as amended, yes.
You want one person to do all 3, or do you want?
I think we have to do
Three separate ones,
separate
three
motions,
separate
yeah.
3
votes.
separate people, I mean.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, just for, spice it up a little bit, I guess. Take the burden off. One person.
I can do this, I'm ready.
Great. So this is for item number 1. I guess we're doing this a little out of order, aren't we?
What do you mean?
I didn't even think about that, sorry.
Why? What's
Well,
that about?
technically, we should have made the motion at the end of item 1, but it's when they're all so intertwined, it's sort of confusing to do it that way.
Oh, I see, we
So-
should have done it right then and been done with
I
it.
think we're okay. Yep.
So, be it ordered that the Freeport Planning Board recommends that the Freeport Town Council adopts the proposed amendments to the Town of Freeport zoning ordinance pertaining to the implementation of the State of Maine's LD 2003, now known as Public Law 2021, Chapter 672, requirements, and pertaining to reducing barriers to the development of accessory dwelling units, and additional non-substantive language cleanup, and amendments made and read at this meeting. The board finds that the proposed amendments are in general harmony with the comprehensive plan and consistent with the plan's vision that Freeport allow a variety of neighborhoods and housing types at a variety of prices, and ensuring that workers in Freeport can afford to live in Freeport.
Be looking back to that one for a textbook example for years to come. Do I hear a second?
Second.
And all in favor? All right. On to a motion for item number 2. Somebody want to take this one on? Rosemary?
Okay, proposed amendment to Chapter 25, Freeport subdivision ordinance moved. Be it ordered that the Freeport Planning Board recommend that the Freeport Town Council adopt the proposed amendments to the subdivision ordinance pertaining to the implementation of the State of Maine's LD 2003, Public Law 2021, Chapter 672, requirements, and pertaining to the implementation of the state's subdivision approval of requirements under Maine Reviewed Statute Title 30-A, subsection 4404, and additional non-substantial language cleanup. The board finds that the proposed amendments are in general harmony with the comprehensive plan and consistent with the plan's vision that Freeport.
That Freeport.
That Freeport. The plan's vision of Freeport. Sorry.
And then,
It's Oh, that. Oh, my gosh.
Yes.
Now
and then
we're
we can-
going to,
1 and 3. 1 and 3 are your friends.
3 of your, wait a minute. What? Allowing a variety of,
Yeah.
allowing a variety of neighborhoods and housing types at a variety of price, protecting natural and historic resources, ensuring that workers in Freeport can afford to live in Freeport.
Yep, that's great.
Okay.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
From Dave, all in favor? All right, another unanimous vote, and the last item, item number 3. Anyone want to tackle this motion?
Be it ordered, be it ordered that the Freeport Planning Board recommend that the Freeport Town Council adopt the proposed amendments to the shoreline zoning ordinance pertaining to the implementation of the State of Maine's LD 2003, Public Law 2021, Chapter 672 requirements, in keeping consistency with the proposed amendments in the Freeport zoning ordinance. The board finds that the proposed amendments are in general harmony with a comprehensive plan and consistent with the plan's vision of Freeport, allowing a variety of neighborhoods, housing types at a variety of prices, and ensuring workers in Freeport can afford to live, ensuring that workers in Freeport can afford to live in Freeport and protecting natural resources.
Okay, do we hear a second?
Second.
Excellent, all in favor? All right. That concludes items 1, 2, and 3. Tonight, items, or item number 4, rather. Anyone here who wishes to address the board on a non-agenda item? Please.
My name is John Schwander, and I'm a land surveyor. And I've been dealing with specifically definitions of high water for nearly 40 years. And I would like you guys to review the various definitions that we have, some of which are conflicting within themselves and confusing. And one of my biggest pet peeves is when an ordinance takes a phrase such as normal high water, which historically has always meant mean high water, and gives it a definition that's different than that. Typically, spring high tide or something to that effect. And I would love to see one definition. I've looked at all these ordinances as I was looking at all this ADU stuff and just finding the problems in and between, and how many times you have to jump from one ordinance to another to get a definition. I was particularly looking at the definition of shore frontage, which uses the term.
What's the page?
The shoreline. That's on the zoning ordinance page 20, or it's on the shoreland ordinance page 8. The problem is, I can't remember where I found the definition of the term shoreline. So I'm working with a particular project, and I'm trying to figure, is the shoreline what we always thought it used to be, which was mean high water, which is really a legal term. Ownership extends to mean high water and oftentimes beyond. Most ordinances have now gotten away from that and use something like spring high tide. That's the most common, easily definable term. But that makes a big difference. In some places it can be 20, 30, 40 feet horizontally. In some places it's 2 feet. If you got a steep bank, there's very little difference. But I was in an area this week where there was a huge grass area, shoreland grass, that went in probably 40 or 50 feet from the normal high water. And I'm trying to figure out, how do I measure that shoreline, or what is the shoreline? So I don't have any answers. I just want you to take a look at that there is one thing in here that where there's a definition that says normal high water or. And there shouldn't be an or. There should be one definition. And from a zoning standpoint, I understand that typically highest annual tide, spring high tide, whatever you want to call it, is the standard nowadays, because you don't want to have a setback from mean high water, which could be 20, 30, or 40 feet away from spring high tide. Although we still have a section in here that calls for 4.9 elevation, which is essentially mean high water. But then it says in the same paragraph, 7.2, which is the elevation of spring high tide. And I thought that had gone out of the ordinance 20 years ago. 20 years ago, nobody had ever talked about spring high tide. And there was a thing in the ordinance that said if it was difficult to determine where the high water line was, you use the elevation. Now, as a surveyor, elevation is the easiest thing. I can do elevations any day. I can't determine shoreland vegetation. That's not my expertise. But I can always determine spring high tide. The other thing that's confusing in here is, this is in the subdivision ordinance. It talks about high water mark or elevation. This is on page 10, if anybody wanted to look at the subdivision. It says, normal high water tidal, the shoreline elevation at which vegetation changes from predominantly aquatic to predominantly terrestrial. That definition is typically what is termed highest annual tide, because upland vegetation can't survive 2 or 3 inundations a year. Okay, but then it goes on and says
4.9.
Was that?
That says 4.9.
Right. In the case where this is difficult or impossible to determine, well, who decides if it's difficult? 20 years ago, I had a homeowner say, it's difficult, use 4.9. 4.9 puts you oftentimes way further out than you should be. And that particular case that I can remember, they probably never could have built at all, but they used 4.9 because that was an option. But then you go, so that talks about the 4.9, which is mean high water, which in every other definition has been eliminated, and it's been turned into something much more like spring high tide. And then in spring high tide, most towns have gone to using the DEP puts out it used to be a chart every year of highest expected tide all up and down the coast. They've now eliminated that and have an online map where you can pick a spot and it'll tell you the elevation of the highest annual tide. I don't know how they update it, but our ordinance talks about using NOAA. And NOAA does their own predictions, but it might make more sense to do what most other towns are doing. Use the DEP thing. It's a whole lot easier for people to access that. And it's our own people. It's not NOAA. Not that NOAA doesn't do a good job, although I have seen some of their predictions that are way off, but, that's neither here nor there. So I'd be really interested in having you put that on your agenda. I don't know how Nick deals with this, and I know how I do. I scratch my head, and I've been doing this for 40 years. So every time I read a different ordinance, I come away more confused as to what really is the definition. For different uses, we have different definitions, and that's probably not the best way to go. Thank you.
Yeah, that's.
So that's outside of,
comment.
yeah.
Are there
It's
any
outside of-
towns that you work in that have ordinance, have better language.
Or
Sure.
it'd be great if you could also shoot us an email, and maybe we could set, this is outside of my area of expertise with the shoreline, but it'd be interesting to talk to the code officer and talk about why those standards are like that, because I know the shoreline zoning was just pretty recently redone. And that's, I think, when those might have came in.
The zoning ordinance on the website, if you go directly to Freeport, Maine, and the shoreland zoning ordinance should mirror each other and should mirror DEP. The subdivision ordinance, I think, might have gotten missed and was in a round of cleanup and got missed again.
Sure.
So, yeah, would love to have your notes. But zoning and shoreland were reviewed and approved by staff, planning board, and DEP fairly recently. So if you go directly to the website, not via Google, you should be able to get the most current ones from 2023.
And I love the fact that in some of your definitions now, it says, go to the zoning ordinance for the definition, rather than repeating it.
And having two different ones.
Exactly. You
Which
only
is
have
what this
one,
has, yeah.
Which is what the new one
Yep.
has, so.
Yep, it's a process, for sure. Shoreland is always the most fun part. All right.
Minutes of last week.
Yes. Well,
Yeah, because we did it last week.
Okay.
yeah, Retta had one comment, I think, but we approved them. Yeah. But yeah, we don't have minutes for last week yet, obviously, I guess.
No, we don't have minutes for last week yet. I think it's a lot to expect from Sharon.
Oh, yeah,
to
for sure,
type that all together.
No
Now it's an
rush.
editing job.
No rush.
Okay. Anyone else? Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Second.
I can't make the motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
And a second. All in favor? All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, folks.
New Year, see you in January.
Happy New
Yeah, right.
Year's.
We're free.